Okay, so we saw nesting components in Livewire. So now we have a bunch of components on a page. And unlike Vue.js, if this were Vue, this is the parent component, and these are all the children components. If you change data in the parent, all of the children automatically update. But because Livewire is server-driven, this architecture would result in really big, ever-increasing payloads. So Livewire chooses a different architectural paradigm, and each component is independent and in charge of itself, like we saw in the last video. But there's a gap in Livewire usage now. There's so many times where you want one component to communicate with another, whether they're sibling components somewhere totally different on the page or whether they're parents and children. So to do this, Livewire offers a really simple API for one concept to communicate between each other, and those are events. So let's dig into events, we'll emit them, we'll listen for them, and we'll see what that's all about. So for our first little experiment, let's add a button in the parent that says refresh children. And when we click it, we want all the children to update. All right. So inside of Hello World, which is our parent, we're going to add a button. And the button is going to say wire click, refresh children. And this is going to say refresh children. Okay. Now we'll add that method, refresh children. And inside of this, we're going to emit an event. So we haven't seen this yet, but you can say emit. Okay. We're going to say emit, refresh, I guess we'll just stick to this, refresh children. We'll emit this event called refresh children, and now in the child, the say hi component, we're going to listen for that event. So protected, and you declare your listeners right up front here with this listeners property. Listeners, refresh children, and now, what's the value of this? Well, you can pass in any method you like. If we have some method like, let's say, refresh me, okay? And then for now, let's just do nothing inside of this. Okay, so now this child component is saying, hey, anytime I hear an event called refresh children emitted, fire this refresh me on myself, which does nothing, so it's actually just going to refresh the component for now. And in the parent, when we click this button and say refresh children, it calls refresh children, emits the event, and does its thing. So let's check it out in action. Refresh children. There we go. We refreshed the parent and we refreshed all of the children. So the first important piece to wrap your head around with this event emission system is when we clicked refresh children, it sent an AJAX request to the server for just this component, because remember, all components are kind of separate unto themselves. It sent an AJAX request to update this. It emitted an event. Now it has to come back to the front end and then fire the event on all the components listening to it. So if you're following that, instead of just one round trip, there's actually a bunch of round trips. So the first one, let's crank our internet way down, slow 3G, like a flip phone. Refresh children, the first one goes out, comes back and refreshes. All the ones listening to it then go out to the server and they refresh themselves. So there's some performance implications there. Anytime you're listening for an event, each component is going to re-render itself. There's no big one request that goes out and it does its thing. It's a bunch of requests, independently, because all these components, like I've said, they're kind of islands unto themselves. So that's a really important thing to know when you're dealing with event emission. Okay, so let's keep going. You can also pass parameters into events. So if we emit refresh children and we want to pass something like foo along with it, then in our listeners, so in our child, we're listening for refresh children, we're calling refresh me, we can accept some variable, right? And then here, I don't know, let's just DDD it, or DDD, let's just DD it out, DDD, domain driven design. All right, some variable. Okay, now we hit refresh, it's going to do that round trip, but it's going to emit the event to the children with the parameter now. And there is foo. So hopefully you were following that. Okay, we'll back out of that change. And notice we're really just refreshing this component. I don't understand why it might feel like, oh, like I have to write all these little one-off methods. Well, you don't. So let's say that this was called refresh children. You could do this, refresh children. And you don't actually have to specify a key and a value if the name of the event and the method are the same. So we'll try this again. We hit refresh children and everything works. And like I said, it feels like we're adding redundant methods here just to refresh, because that's a pretty common need. So you can put any action that you would normally put inside of, an event handler where you put actions, you could just say refresh. Okay, and now refresh, and everything still works. All right, here's the last little bit. So remember I showed you the performance implications where one request has to go to the server, then back to basically register that the event has been emitted, and then everything updates. So you can kind of reduce that load just a little bit by, let's say, we'll skip this backend method altogether. We can use the magic emit refresh, what was it? Children. Okay, now I hit refresh children and everything happens right away. But notice that itself didn't refresh because there wasn't a round trip for itself. So this is just something to know, that if you emit from JavaScript, because this is an event handler in JavaScript, if you emit from a JavaScript action like this, it's going to skip that round trip and just fire the event to anybody listening. So refresh children now just refreshes the children. So it's not always possible to do this, but in the cases where it is, this gets you a little bit of a performance boost. Just so we can look at the network, let's see what's going on. Refresh children only emits to the children. So if you think about it, this emit thing is happening in JavaScript. So JavaScript is capable of emitting events itself. So let's actually take a look at something I haven't even touched on yet, but it's one of the most powerful features of Livewire. Livewire has an object on the window called Livewire. It's just the JavaScript portion of Livewire, window.livewire. You can do livewire.emit and then emit any event you want. Foo, nothing happens because nobody's listening for foo. But if we do refresh children and emit that, notice they all refreshed. So this is super powerful. You can call Livewire emit from anywhere in JavaScript. You could have event listeners from some other system, like, I don't know, maybe you have a Firebase database and you can have a callback. So when your Firebase database updates, you could say emit and then, some update or something. So that's pretty cool. Super powerful pattern. Really good to know. All right, so the last little thing that's available for events that's worth knowing is sometimes you want to emit an event from a child to a parent, but only from a child to a parent and not to any siblings or children of that child. So let's do that. If you need to do that, you can emit up. So let's fire an event from the child now and listen to it in the parent and use emit up. So we're going to want to listen for an event in the parent. We'll say protected listeners. Who can spell listeners? Not me. Okay? And now inside of here, we'll listen for, I don't know, foo, because this might just be a little bit easier to wrap your head around. And then when foo happens, we'll refresh. Okay? That's good. And now inside of say hi, let's also do that. Let's just listen for foo and refresh. So now every component on the page is listening for this foo event. Okay? And now on this click, we'll emit foo. But instead of just emitting, why don't we we'll do this in PHP. You can do this in JavaScript, but it might be easier for you to wrap your head around. Let's say emit foo, okay? And then we're gonna add a method called emit foo, where in it, we'll say emit. Oh, I did this again. This is a real problem. Sorry about that. I'm in the parent view, not the child view. So in the child view, instead of refresh, we're going to call this emit foo event on the child, emit foo. And now we can just emit foo. Now let's just see this work so that we get back to a place of sanity. I hit refresh and everything refreshes because it emitted to all the components and they're all listening for it. So I'm in a child, I can say emit up, and now it's only going to emit to parents listening. So refresh, emit up, and there we go. Now only these two updated. So sometimes that's helpful. Like if you have a child component and it was like a form and the contact updated and you don't want to have all those AJAX requests fire, notice, look at the payloads now. If I hit refresh, it's only two. It's itself and then it's its parent. So there you go. That's events, event emitting, event listening. It's a really powerful pattern. The reason I really like it because I don't have to remember. Like in Vue early days, there was dispatch, there was broadcast, there was all these things to kind of remember the differences in the names and how they mapped. But I like that it's just one simple event bus. You can emit an event and you can listen for an event. And then all the rest is up to you to kind of finagle how you want that to work. So hopefully that was clear to you. That's events in Livewire.